forms of research, which
Yes.
can be done as desk review or as a conceptual piece of research or fieldwork, which is possible to other modes. So Tulika and I requested Tulika to join me in one session. We did a kind of session and Tulika has done some research. She shared that. I also shared some ideas with them. And then we thought that, that's why we should invite you and we should invite Chandan, etc. And we are inviting next week Rishabh and Ravneet because Rishabh has done very good textbook analysis because that can be a very, very good form of MPhil research as well. And Ravneet has analyzed films and child protagonists in films, and so she's drawn influences on childhood based on films, etc. So how to make those critical frameworks and make them research-oriented frameworks. That is what our exercise is about. So I think we can start. Somebody is very noisy. Who's so noisy? Everybody? I'm requesting you to put your... everybody's on mute actually. Everybody is now on mute and everybody should put their videos off also. That's right. So we are 22 people right now, Latika, and we might get joined by one or two more. And this is essentially the MPhil class and our community of research scholars who are also our colleagues and teachers in different colleges. I'm very happy, MPhil scholars, to introduce you to Dr. Latika Gupta. She's one of the, what should I say, one of the most committed and most popular teachers of our department. And, she joined our department. She's been with us for many years because she studied there and she did a PhD with Professor Krishna Kumar, etc. many years ago. And then she's been teaching in Delhi University. She was also part of NCF, etc. And she formally joined, although she was already there in our department, but she formally joined our department in a permanent capacity 2+ years ago. And so she's engaged with all the programs of study. So she's engaged with B.Ed, with M.Ed, with MPhil and with PhD, and she's also the BLEd coordinator. So she also has a whole lot of administrative responsibilities. She's very fond of cats, if that says anything to you about her personality. And she's very indulgent towards her cats, and I wish I was her cat sometimes. Because she sends us pictures, etc., about her cat also. Now, many of you have read Latika's writings. So in terms of her scholarly contributions, which is why we have invited her here today, she did some very, very good work. She's got publications in EPW, and I think all of you have read her work on the Muslim girls, which had come out in EPW in terms of the social identity, etc., in the walled city. Many of you said you have read it. She's also got, you got a book out from Routledge also, right, Latika? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, these two things I remember very well. And of course, she's got many more, and she's also got her hands full with MPhil scholars, with PhD scholars, with MEds, with everybody. So she's what I would say the booming, buzzing academic who sits in the new building, and she's always surrounded by a pool of scholars, which is very good. And you all finish on time. That's another thing, Latika, that all your scholars finish their work on time.
Yes.
That's a very important accomplishment because, otherwise, how scholars are, they tend to, well, not intentionally, but very often, they just tend to procrastinate a little and they want to read more or have a moratorium, etc. So, Latika, today we have invited you specifically, and I made a promise to my scholars and the other community of colleagues here that, you would tell us the importance of a conceptual framework or a theoretical framework when we engage in research, how we actually build it, why it's important, and why research is sterile without it. Because in descriptive research, people tend to think that if you do thick descriptions, that's why the description your research is complete. And the analysis also they think is a thick description approach. But how to arrive at that framework, even when you do a research paper, the importance of having some sort of a conceptual framework. And, we are very happy if you draw from your own PhD, because you wrote a very interesting PhD, which is available on Shodh Ganga. So a lot of people have read it also. Your PhD, Tulika's PhD, Sandeep's and Gunjan Sharma. 4 PhDs are available on Shodh Ganga. It was compulsory in the year all of you submitted. So a lot of people have sourced it and read it because they wanted to familiarize themselves. Latika has a training in sociology and of course education. And many of you will be happy to know that she's from the first batch of BLEd, right? The first
Yes.
batch of BLEd. JMC? JMC.
James. James.
That's right. So, Latika, it's over to you. And since Chandan is tied up, you can take your time. You can take 45 minutes or even an hour if you wish. And then we will take questions and answers after that. The rest of
Okay.
you, welcome. And let's all now move to muting. I'm also going mute and I'm also putting off my video so that all of us have more bandwidth. लतिका
Okay.
अगर आप थोड़ा हिंदी में भी बोलेंगी तो बहुत अच्छा होगा मिक्स्ड
हाँ हाँ.
भाषा में अगर आप बोल ले बिकॉज आप तो हैं ही बायलिंगुअल आप दोनों भाषाओं में because we have a mixed group of students. Thank you, Latika. Over to you. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks. Thanks a lot, ma'am. It's an honor and it's a privilege to interact with your scholars, your senior scholars who are like us now, and the ones who are now beginning their career and also exploring the field of knowledge. I think this is also a good opportunity because we are doing all kinds of things but very limited academic work. So I'm very pleased to interact with you all, and also um, uh, I mean, I'm excited that I will, after almost 10 years, be able to talk a bit about my own journey. And I have seen two things. One is that a lot of people get very shocked and startled that I had completed my PhD in three and a half years, and in between I had 1 year of Fulbright fellowship as well. So how can work proceed so fast? Because you're thinking and you are applying, and then you're again thinking, and so a lot of scholars have expressed their shock. And second thing I have encountered very often in the last now 9 years, because my dissertation copy is in the library. And every year, one or two scholars at least come to me and ask me specifically that why did I ask this particular question, or why did I pay attention to this particular dimension. So one of them, which has kind of stayed with me for long, it was right in the year 2012 or 13, I think. One girl said that we got an assignment in the research methodology class, and we had to pick up any four questions or five questions that a PhD scholar had asked, and then we had to comment on the quality of questions. We had to analyze their relevance. So there was a section in my elaborate tool about choice of dress, and I had asked the young girls, adolescent girls, questions about their dress. What do they prefer? What do they like? And I had given a long list. So one was to choose what you like. And then I'd also asked them that, in certain moments or on certain occasions, which dress would you prefer to like? And then I had analyzed it on a rating scale. Then I had also asked them a question like that Sania Mirza is a very famous tennis player, and she has been winning, but in order to play tennis, she has to wear a very short skirt. And some people object to her wearing short skirts. So, what is your opinion about it, or what would you like to advise if to Sania Mirza? So I remember this scholar had asked me that, why would you waste your time, and why would you increase the number of questions by asking about dress? Dress is a very personal choice, and dress is something very trivial and I mean, nothing very deep, and it may also change over a period of time. It is true that our choice of dress may change over a period of time. And she said, so when I presented these questions in my class, I also analyzed that maybe the questions were, everybody wondered that why should anybody ask about dress, and I also thought that maybe the questions were not very good, and my classmates also felt that the questions were not very good. And so then I asked her that what was the topic of my study, what was I studying, and she said it had something to do with Muslim girls. And I said, and that's it. And she couldn't tell me beyond that. So that kind of helped me to understand that when we start to do our own study, or when we read somebody else's work, many young scholars probably don't develop the skill of paying attention to the most important uh, contours of that study. Like, this young scholar hadn't really conceptualized in her mind or grasped that my study was about the identity of Muslim girls and education. So, Muslim is coming next for me. Girls will come even later. First thing for me would be identity. To study, to develop my own understanding, and then to explore in the real field. So, for that, the first step for me was to understand identity. And this is where the conceptual structure, or what we call theoretical structure, comes in. The identity is not a new topic, and it's been there since probably the structures of knowledge started. There's some noise. I don't know. Um, Namita ma'am is asking, there is some noise, but I'm not getting any noise.
There is some hammering noise. Are you all getting it? Are you getting a hammering noise, people? Yes, they are. So anyway, let's hope. Let's hope. So people just
Can
put on your headphones. That's all I can say. Yeah. Okay. Continue, Latika. Continue.
Yeah, can they hear me clearly?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So, um, identity was not a new topic, uh, and it had various dimensions. If we have done masters, if we have read a bit of literature, then we all know that almost all topics in the world have been understood or theorized in many disciplines. Now, the life of those scholars, I think, is a relatively smoother or easier if they are in specific departments like history or psychology or even sociology. But in our department, the general expectation from the scholars is to know a bit about every topic in various disciplines. And that expectation is coming from the basic structure of knowledge in education. That's why we study psychology, we study sociology, we study research as methodology, we also study philosophy. So, when I started asking this scholar what was my basic inquiry or topic, and when she couldn't recollect the word identity and I had to bring it to her attention, even then she couldn't immediately draw a connection between dress and identity. And that is where I think this experience has remained embedded in my consciousness, that as a scholar, how do we approach the topic? And that approach is largely shaped by how much are we trying to familiarize ourselves with the past knowledge. So if I put it um, in a kind of a straight expression, I would say that a scholar analyzes all the knowledge in the past to present a theory in future. And that analysis means that we kind of know the larger field. We understand that in philosophy, in sociology, in psychology, these This has been the approach to understand, to theorize. These are the key people. Now, when I'm saying this, it sounds pretty easy or simple, but it's not that simple. And that's where people say, but how do I know what is meaningful research, what is relevant? How do I even know who to read? And that's also a very good point, that many of us start doing the research, but we don't really know who is and who are the most accepted and reliable scholars in our field in the current times. And I think that's largely because one main habit is that we don't develop, which is that when we read any paper, or teacher, even when teachers give us readings, we don't go to their reference list to see who they referred to. And year after year after year, even to my MEd and MPhil scholars now, I have to help them develop this habit. That if you have read, suppose for instance, many students here read a lot of work done by Krishna Kumar. But obviously, Krishna Kumar would have also read some theorists and some people whose work he would have used to analyze or to offer new insight. So people never go at the end to see who from who has Krishna Kumar benefited to offer a theoretical structure. And that's where what happens is that people read here and there, but they don't really draw any connection. And another thing that I have noticed that scholars don't pay attention to is, which is the year of publication. Who wrote what and when? And so they don't ever develop a very chronologically synthesized understanding of the topic that they're studying. Suppose they are studying gender, which is now vast topic. But how did gender, even the term, get coined? When did it get coined? When did the shift from women to gender take place? Was it a easy shift? How did it come? In which field did it come? And from where have we taken it? What were the various slogans from with which gender came about? And then, when suppose it started in the field of sociology, in proper sociology, classic sociology, then what, in which context did it start? Who were those sociologists? Or suppose the scholar is working on influence of class or interaction of socio-economic class with children's learning in the school, then when did class or socio-economic class become a factor to study in theory? What was happening before that? When this get got recognized as a factor? Who did that? Who established it? And after that, based on that person's claims or theoretical structure, who all have studied it? These kind of basic ideas can help us to map how the this topic has developed over the years, in which disciplines it has developed, and how that crisscross has happened. If it started in psychology, then at what point did sociologists become interested in it? Or if it started in philosophy, because most of the knowledge started in philosophy, at what point did sociologists become interested in it? And then at what point did it become a full-fledged topic in educational theory? And how has then that been conceptualized in educational theory? So I think two basic things that help us to formulate uh, our conceptual framework is: one, if your supervisor or your MEd or MPhil readings are introducing you to a certain topic, always go back to its reference list and see who that author is referred to. Now, a lot of people consider it I mean, term of subjectivity, but I don't think it's subjectivity. I think if your teacher has given you a reading, then the teacher has already lodged you in a theoretical frame, has introduced you to a perspective, to a specific perspective, or to 4 5 perspectives to think about it. That's where you are starting your journey from. You acquire those perspectives, make those understand those readings and their main points, and then see who were the contributory scholars to those points, and you then expand and develop a full scale of the theoretical work done in that field. So basically, what you're doing is, or you should first do, is that you conceptualize the broader study, broader field of that topic. So, since I was studying the broader field of identity of Muslim girls, I understood that three terms were taking me or helping me enter the field, which was identity, then religion, and then gender of girls. I then my basic reading of identity through the encyclopedia helped me to understand that it has constructions in psychology coming from philosophy, moral, political philosophy, and also obviously sociology. So through that, I kind of situated myself in the sea of many theoretical structures. So when I knew that there are about say 12 or 13 basic theoretical formulations to understand identity, it became easy for me to choose what would be relevant to use to study Muslim girls living in Delhi. Because when I had familiarized myself with those 12 or 13 formulations on identity, I had meanwhile also understood that there were some additional structures to pay attention to, which is that in India, Muslim girls will be called minority, and there will also be girls who come from poorer sections of the society, and then there will be whole discourse which is coming from the government. India is one country where the divide between scholarly knowledge and the knowledge that comes from various governmental reports and committee reports and documents is not that wide. In fact, a lot of knowledge has come or become knowledge because scholars contributed to some government committee. So, my awareness of the larger field of girls and Muslims had brought to my cognizance that that's not only activist knowledge. There is some scholarly merit, and lot of people have entered the scholarly field through that route. So I'm saying that the first step always, therefore, is to make a broader context and to know roughly that this is in these different disciplines, and in these different disciplines these have largely been the chronologically organized currents of thought. It's very important to know how was identity understood in the 1920s, then how was it understood in the say 1950s, and then probably 1980s, and now currently in psychology, in sociology, in philosophy. So I had literally those diagrams, literally those uh, the flow charts, and which had subject wise chronologically arranged names of scholars, and then what did they bring to the field. And then it was easy for me to situate myself, to locate myself, because I had understood one thing, that by PhD or by making certain choices in PhD, you would identify with a certain group of scholars, and you can never ever do justice to all these schools of thought in through one study. So you will make a choice, and once you make that choice, it would automatically mean that you are categorizing yourself as somebody who upholds these frameworks and likes to think and analyze or work in this framework. So, for instance, if we in master's program here in sociology of education, we teach Bernstein's theory of codes, linguistic codes, and framing. And and Bernstein's work is recognized as the origin point of new sociology of education, which is that for the first time a scholar established that everything may go very smoothly, the teacher may be very good, and school functions very well, and yet the class, the socioeconomic class of children would largely determine why some children don't uh, fare well at school. Now, if you work in if you suppose you choose Bernstein's framework to analyze a school in India, then obviously you have not just made a simple choice of methodology. It's not a choice of convenience that I am using Bernstein or Bourdieu or Freudian theory or structure or Piagetian structure. No, it's not that simple a choice. By that choice, you are also launching yourself in the world of theory, in the world of knowledge, on a certain footpad or on a certain, I mean, it's almost like a label, and one or the other choice you will anyhow make. So one shouldn't really feel very edgy or inhibited about it, because if you don't make any choice, then your knowledge, the knowledge that you will produce, can also not be categorized, and categorization is what the structures of knowledge really appreciate. So if the more focused you are, the better it will become for the receivers of your knowledge to categorize yourself. And I had become very conscious about it, and I knew it. Yet it became very crystal clear to me when the reviews of my books came. There were about 7, 8 reviews, and in every review, I noticed that obviously they were very senior people, that they had used certain categorizing terms to say that this work comes from here or this work comes from there, in this school and that school. So I hadn't thought that much, as much as they had thought about categorizing my work, right? So you first develop a very broad field of your topic, your understanding, your basic familiarity, and then you situate yourself in terms of your priority. This is what I feel like doing. Now, honestly speaking, there cannot be any full fledged formula to make that choice. It has to largely be at the level of the scholar's hunch. Scholars feel that this looks more suitable for me, and with your supervisor, you can make that choice little more, with little more objectivity, that these may not be very suitable in our context, and this may be more suitable. But you have to have a broader field, and you have to know that once you have made those choices, then you will be categorized in that sense. Also, it's very important to make those choices so that you know exactly what you are trying to study. Yes, I was trying and I wanted to study identity of Muslim girls living in Delhi. That is true. But what do I study in this? There are many things, as theoretical formulations that help me to understand. There are many things to understand identity. So what do I study? Exactly. And that is where, when you have prioritized that these are the aspects or these are the concepts that people have uh, elaborated to understand identity, then these are the concepts to which I will also pay attention to, which would mean that in my interaction, in my aim to understand their thought process, their emotions, their life, their choices, I will pay attention to these. So, in my in my review of literature and in my familiarity with theoretical structures, I had come across a short piece by West and Zimmerman. They were foreign scholars, and the title of their work was "Doing Gender." And in that, they had elaborated that gender is something that we all very actively do, and we are constantly practicing it. So every choice that we make in life is what we are actively doing. And then when I read their piece and I went back to their reference list, I found the reference of Erving Goffman, who had who had studied public places and gender advertisements to theorize gender almost 80, 90 years ago. And it's a very short book, not very long, but when I was reading that book, I found out he had said that even street is a very relevant space. You can observe that how men and women behave differently. I did not analyze advertisements at all in my work, but I got the idea of street. That street is a marker to differentiate between men and women. And at that point, I also recalled Professor Krishna Kumar's essay, Growing Up Male. He had also narrated one episode that how girls walk on streets and how boys walk on streets is very different. The roads, the purpose that street serves in the life of girls and boys. And then I started noting down that on what are the contexts, the real life contexts or spaces in which have been used by scholars to help us appreciate that there is a gender difference, that there's a difference between how men, women, girls, boys operate. And in such context, when I further studied, I found that there were a lot of feminist writers who had talked that even the idea of dress is a socially constructed idea. And if it is a socially constructed idea, then that idea leads to further ideas. And this is where the idea of modesty gets associated with dress. And this is where the ideas of knowing people by their dress came in. And that's how religion and gender or modesty, immodesty, class, all that came in. Now, one advice that I had followed that Professor Krishna Kumar had given to me, that when you do your PhD, you read lot of theory. And if you really want to draw good insights from theory, you must keep reading literature so that your mind is not fatigued with the theoretical insights, and you must kind of rejuvenate or excite your mind and give it some nutrition by reading literature. So I used to read a lot of novels that time, and I from one to the next, I started reading a lot of novels that were written which brought out colonial context in India. Then I moved to reading about colonizers, and that's when I started learning that at some point in British society, dress was also a marker of class. And here in my readings on Islam in very theoretical context, I read very serious scholars arguing that dress was one of the initial markers of distinguishing between those who had land ownership and those who did not have land ownership. So it got transferred and people adopted it as a marker of distinction wherever religions came about. So, in all the religions, dress got used as a marker of distinction. And little familiarity with writing on Muslims, even newspaper writings and journalistic writings had brought to my attention probably during my graduation only, that burqa was earlier a marker of class. It was used to mark those women out from the sight of common people who belonged to rich families, so that the common men did not think of them as potential match or as potential interest. And all this was building up in my mind that dress is a marker of distinction. And dress is also a marker or a statement uh, that we use to convey to the world who am I. So dress in that sense is in every moment carrying with it sociological, psychological, and sometimes also political messages with it. and therefore people pay a lot of attention to it. Now, if identity is essentially getting crystallized and constructed in adolescence, then obviously the adolescent mind will pay attention to dress. I mean, in common discussions on common parlance, we say that adolescents are very very conscious about how do they look, and they spend lot many hours dressing up. But that's not enough to accept that dress has such a detailed link that has been explained in theory, and that looks like a convincing theoretical structure or conceptual structure to me. So that's how many dimensions of identity opened up in front of me, and then I started listing them. So I literally had this one flow chart which was arranging very chronologically, in which I had arranged that this is how, then this sociologist came, he took his work and took it further. So by the time 60s, Bourdieu came in, and then this is how we understand identity chronologically in in psychology, in political philosophy. And interestingly, when I was reading some literature on identity in political philosophy, very very abstract, but I figured out that even there dress was mentioned. For example, the famous political philosopher Charles Taylor, when talking about how capitalism has eroded larger morality or ethics from the West, he found it very very problematic that there's a whole generation of young people in American universities whose whole sole agenda is to aspire for a jeans pair of jeans which costs $25,000, and he found it very problematic. And he goes on and on and on analyzing why that aspiration for a pair of jeans only after a dress is a sign of loss of morality. And so that helped me understand that dress is not a casual thing, and therefore it must get some attention in my interaction with young adolescent girls. Similarly, while I understood the identity, I also tried to familiarize myself with Islam. And a lot of people have asked me that I am a Hindu woman, then why didn't I choose to study Hinduism or Hindu girls? Why Islam? At one level it's a very good question, and it's a very tough choice, because you remember your religion's details even when you are sleeping. You won't take more than 5 minutes to get up, have a glass of water and start talking about it. But to remember the details of other religion that you have not lived is very very difficult, and you tend to forget. So your mind, the mental map of that religion and its basic tenets and its ideas, take very long to get formed. But at the same time, in your own religion you're so steeped in it that your mind doesn't consider everything and anything as special. Your mind tends to take it for granted, and therefore you miss those minor exciting points. Whereas in other religion, because you're constantly learning new things, your mind pays attention to even minutest things as something very exciting. And I thought that now that I'm doing a PhD, let me stretch myself and uh, let me try to engage with another big civilizational development. And that's where I started reading on Islam. Honestly, I also read Quran, and I read many translations of Quran. And those days YouTube and Google reading hadn't become so easy. Google was there, but it hadn't become a part of life like this. So from one book to the next, to the next, to the next, that's the journey I was making, book or scholarly articles. Now even JSTOR is common. That time I had a JSTOR account which I had stolen from somebody, and I started when I read about Islam and I read scholarly commentaries, I figured out that every religion offers a cosmology. So I was reading on Islam, And I was also reading commentaries on religion, that in sociology or in psychology, what are the theoretical constructions, that what does religion do to our mind. And that's where I understood the whole cosmology of every religion, especially Islam and Hinduism. And that's where I figured out that every religion gives a sense of purpose in life. Every religion offers an explanation of life and death. And when we come to school, when we carve out a professional identity for ourselves, that's and also we are developing a sense of a purpose in life, a goal in life. So I understood that there are probably several sources, and religion is probably one of the major sources that helps people to develop a sense of purpose in life. And what the source, the sense of purpose that religion gives cannot be the same, or cannot be very consistent or happy with probably the sense of purpose that school wants to develop, because the sense of purpose here is God given, God controlled, God's will, God's desire. We are just the medium. So, very, very passive role to a human being. Whereas school is trying to develop our agency, irrespective of gender, caste, religion, nationality, whatever. So, obviously, there's a tension there. And I thought that if I have to understand religious identity and education both in this case, then ideas about life and death have to be factored in. So that's how I made my second choice, conceptual choice as well as methodological choice. That I will see that at the time of adolescence, when they are carving out their identity, in what terms are they carving out? Are they really thinking about are they developing that sense of individual goal and purpose, or Islam is what is, or the knowledge or cosmology of Islam is what is shaping their sense of purpose in life? And that's where another section kind of got framed in my mind. Now, what am I doing here, or what did I do? I familiarized myself with theoretical explanations on largely three or four main topics, and then I started to marry them. And then I started to see if there were tensions between what the school aims to do on what this, what these what these social institutions are achieving in their lives, or there are similarities. And that's where I kept making my conceptual choices, and I kept making my methodological choices, that this is what I will ask, or this is what I will explore, and this is what I will pay attention to, and this is what I really want to understand. So a very trivial question like, what advice would you give to Sania Mirza, actually did not remain trivial. And they very elaborately took stands, and they advised, a lot of them advised to Sania Mirza that, these are very worldly happiness or worldly pleasures of winning certain medals or cups, and they're not going to make you a good person. If you really want to be a good person, you should be in the eyes of the Allah, and for which you should cover up yourself. So the choice of dress is also a reflective of the quality and character of the person, and that's where the purpose of life also comes in. So the important point was that these adolescent girls had, in their crucial years, internalized the framework or traditional ideas propagated in a religion much, much more than the ideas of liberty and justice and freedom of choice, etc., that the school could have given. So that's the whole gamut, or that's the whole journey of making a very informed conceptual choice, locating it, which means locating identity in terms of dress, purpose, one's own purpose in life, one's role in life, etc., and then making sense of it, analyzing it. So once I got this data, how are girls interpreting, how are they responding to it, then I already had made a choice that I will understand and analyze their utterances in reference to the theoretical structures in which dress is important or is an important marker of identity. Now, another very minor point, but that was also coming from identity. I had read lots and lots of work by Piaget, Erikson, and then David Elkind to understand adolescence a bit more. And that's where I had chosen certain words very strategically. So I hadn't asked them that what would you say to Sanya Mirza. I had asked what would you advise. And in fact, I had many such questions in which I asked them to advise, because the theoretical structures, Piagetian formal operational thought, and Erikson and David Elkind uh, have theorized it as a cognitive capacity that the adolescent now starts thinking about the world's issues and feels very confident and upbeat about this capacity, that I have an opinion and I have a very original opinion, and most people around me, especially adults, could not have this kind of opinion, so they have created a mess. But here I am with my energy and opinion, and I can change, I can bring fresh energy. So I mean, I had faith. I mean, I was attracted to this theoretical claim by three major scholars that the young mind feels the energy and the confidence to have opinions and to share those opinions. So I very strategically use the word advise. You advise. Obviously, when you ask for advice, you place somebody on a higher pedestal, and you convey that you're worthy of advice. So sometimes the girls even used to ask me that, who am I to give any advice? And I would use the setting to convey that sense of confidence. And I think that's how I did not face this problem that many scholars face, that either after going to the field, they feel that, they didn't ask many relevant questions, or probably they did not even know that this could have been asked, or they asked so much extra and so much data has now come up that they do not know what to do. And then very typical answer then would come is that, but we had done the pilot. The pilot is not going to help us appreciate whether we have made correct theoretical choices or not. So theoretical choices therefore are identifying broader field and then choosing some from them with some kind of logical connection between them, so that we exactly know what we want to study, and in terms of methodology and both analysis as well, we remain consistent on that terrain. We don't kind of lose track of what we had started to do and what we ended up doing. There should be a very strong link between that. And that's where I never ever felt that there is anything important that I missed out, or there was any data that I really did not need. Yes, some questions brought out a lot more data, which helped me to analyze and offer insights, and some questions offered me a completely different kind of data. Some of it was extra or more than I expected. So I had understood one thing, that if you want to understand identity and conceptualize it, yes, you engage with those people like Muslim girls, but then you also must engage with others who are important to that person, because the classic theory in sociology is that our identity gets formulated in relation to our significant others. So some space has to be given to, say, family members and parents. and family members and parents are important. But what do you talk to them? What, I mean, obviously, I don't want to ask me what you want your daughter to become. How does it matter? What do they want really her to become? And these banal questions I did not want to ask, because I had worked in government institutions and I had done many of these basic surveys, and I either felt confident that they don't yield anything great, or at least theoretically they don't contribute much. So what do I ask? And that's when I started, when I read Bernstein's framework and his ideas. I also became familiar that the talk at home is connected to literacy at school, which, and his basic idea was that the children coming from lower working class groups do not get many knowledge based talk experiences at home, because of which they cannot make sense of many experiences at school. So that had convinced me that talk at home has a special place to prepare you uh, for knowledge, for the world of knowledge. My familiarity with very simple feminist writing had etched this in my mind. Kamla Ganesh had studied this a lot. That what parents talk to girls at home and what parents talk to boys at home is very different, and parents never talk serious issues with girls. So there was a minor point about gender difference, like property problems, issues, challenges. They don't talk to girls. So there's a gender difference, and that's when I understood that talk is very important, and talk is a marker of who you consider. I mean, talk is a marker of cognitive capacities, intellectual capacities, intelligence, and it's also a marker of who you consider worthy of some cognitive task or intellectual task. And therefore, that's how I started identifying that in order to construct the image of this girl, adolescent girl, in the eyes of her parents, what all can I ask her parents? And talk was one of them. That in terms of talk, how do their parents place them? What do they consider them worthy of? And then obviously the gender related the writings that I was reading, the surveys in India. Ritu Bhasin and Kamla Menon had brought out this point that it is not that poor people in Muslim community oppose girls education, but it is the fear of not managing to find an equally educated groom that pushes them to control the level or the limit of girls' education. And that's where I figured out that this has been theorized, so there is no point asking another 50 parents or 50 set of parents the same question. So I rather asked them about fear, that what are the fears that you have in your mind about your girl because she goes to school. And the talk question turned out to be far, far more interesting than what I had visualized, because parent after parent, nobody listed the issues. What do they talk to their girls about? Because they said that there is absolutely no need to talk to girls. What is the need? Our girl is not doing anything wrong. And that's where a completely different pattern of life or a framework of life came up, that there is a set mold of life, and if a girl doesn't follow that mold, only then parents talk. So talk is not discussion, talk is not abstract thinking, talk is not reflective thinking. Talk is simply a marker of correction in the event of wrong behavior. And talk then acquires a completely different sociological nuance, that it is not an exchange of ideas. So, if there is no talk at home at all, then obviously talk to literacy and talk to higher aspirations the knowledge based discourse, all that route needs to be analyzed. So, coming back to the point that when you develop your familiarity, or you become fully familiar with the vast field of knowledge related to your topic, then you kind of systematically jot them down and make certain choices. And once you have made those choices, then you stick to those choices in your theoretical understanding as well as in your methodological approach and analysis. And that's where your work remains very exciting. You don't lose thread of it, and you don't feel a sense of boredom or a saturation from it. So it becomes a very tight, crisp, and doable, achievable end goal. One chance reading had already by helped me to understand that where what will be the upper limit of my analysis, which is then when I started reading scholars on Islam. Then I also started reading that what is it that mainstream scholars on Islam in India had said about girls education. And then one of the prominent scholars of Islam was Iqbal, Allama Iqbal, who is also a very progressive philosopher. And his commentary on Islam and everything was very, very progressive, because he dreamt of marrying science and commitment to Islam. And he at several in his several writings had repeatedly said that if you think in Islam's framework, then I do not know what to say of women. I think the issues are much deeper, far more complex, and I have no answers to that. So I understood that certain questions have been deliberated about, and even a scholar like Iqbal felt pretty helpless in answering them, and so there is a limit to which the traditional religious framework of a religion and the modern discourse of knowledge and democracy and choice can come together. And that is where some some hard stands or rude looking stands will have to be taken. So that helped me to uh, pitch my recommendations as well, that a balance or a middle point is probably not available and not possible. If 60 years ago itself a very, very Islam loving scholar had accepted that for women there is this unresolvable kind of an issue. So that's where even the upper limit or the boundary of my PhD had become accessible to me through my familiarity with theoretical writings. I think we can. Uh,
I think, Latika, that's been a fantastic session. I have been so mesmerized by it. And the spontaneity of the flow, how it was coming out from your head and your heart. And you said such lofty things, because you talked of gender, you talked of religion, and you talked of theories of identity, and how you had done the explorations, and from the contemporary gone back to the originals and read the where the contemporary writers had got their inspiration from, or their ideas from. And you talked about a multidisciplinary lens, and you also talked about how paradoxes, debates, internal conflicts, incongruences were all part of your journey. But the resolution does not necessarily happen. But it keeps you going for further probe and further query. I'm really, really, really thankful to you for this very, very erudite, very articulate, and very passionate. What should I say? It was almost like a rendition, I would say. Really fantastic. And without you telling us your topic, we've all understood. I mean, I, of course, have read your work, but all those who haven't even read your work would be able to immediately put into context what you did. And God bless Mia Mirza for what she typifies. But considered in your research. So now we will take questions.
Yes.
And I will open the floor to the community of scholars and colleagues to take questions, to make comments, some observations, anything you want to ask Latika, big or small, please feel free to come forward. MPhil scholars, first for you. First, the field is open for you. MPhil scholars. कोई कुछ पूछना चाहेंगे? मैम हिंदी भी बहुत बढ़िया बोलती हैं, तो आप हिंदी में भी उनसे बातचीत कर सकते हैं. नारायण, मैंने देखा आप अनम्यूट कर रहे थे, आप कुछ पूछना चाहते हैं? नारायण, आइए नारायण.
मैं समझना चाह रहा था मैम, पहले थैंक यू मैम, मैम से एक इंटरेक्शन करने के लिए. मैम मैं ये जानना चाह रहा था कि ये स्टडीज में हमारा जो सेंट्रल स्टडीज को लेकर के इस तरह की स्टडी को, ये मुझे समझ में नहीं आ रहा कि इंटेंशन क्या था हमें, मतलब स्टडीज को इस तरह की, मतलब.
I think you might just give a little backdrop of what you studied. Latika, can you unmute? You'll have to unmute.
Yeah, I missed his question completely. So I'm muting my mic and camera both so that I can hear it clearly.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
नारायण,
मैं ये जानना चाह रहा हूँ. जी मैम, मैं जानना चाहता हूँ कि जो मैम की स्टडी है वो स्टडी अच्छी है कि आइडेंटिटी, रिलीजन एंड जेंडर, बट उस स्टडी के बैकग्राउंड में एक मोटो की जो कंक्लूजन आता है, एक फाइंडिंग आता है, और हम उसको लेकर के चलते हैं. जैसे मेरा स्टडी है ट्राइबल में. अब ट्राइबल में आजकल चल रहा है मैम कि जैसे ट्राइबल रिलीजन है और उनका कल्चर, और एक तरफ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट भी है क्योंकि हमारा एक तरफ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल वैल्यूज है. तो इस तरह के मैं स्टडीज को मैं थोड़ा सा अपने तरीके से सोच रहा था, इसलिए मैम से थोड़ा क्वेश्चन पूछने के लिए मेरे पास.
हाँ, देखिए मैं आपको बताती हूँ कि मैंने आइडेंटिटी और रिलीजियस और जेंडर आइडेंटिटी को क्यों स्टडी किया. मैंने इसको अध्ययन इसीलिए किया क्योंकि शिक्षा में हम ये समझना चाहते हैं हर समय कि कौन से ऐसे कारक हैं या कौन से ऐसे सामाजिक तत्व हैं जो किसी भी समूह के बच्चों की शिक्षा को प्रभावित करते हैं. तो वो कमजोर बनाते हैं या सुदृढ़ बनाते हैं, हम ये नहीं सोच रहे हैं. कौन कौन से कारक हैं जिनको शिक्षा, जिनमें या जिनका शिक्षा पे बहुत गहरा प्रभाव पड़ता है. तो ऑलरेडी जो हमारे पास सिद्धांत हैं पहले से, वो हमें बता रहे हैं कि गरीबी और धर्म और जो जेंडर है, लिंग भेद है, ये सारे जो हैं बहुत ज्यादा शिक्षा पे प्रभाव डालते हैं. और जितने ज्यादा बच्चों की गरीबी के अनुभव होते हैं, उतना ज्यादा स्कूल में आके और स्कूल से होने वाले जो हमारे स्कूल के लिए जो तय लक्ष्य होते हैं, उनको पूरा होने में रोड़े आते हैं. तो एक तो ये अध्ययन हो सकता है कि जब गरीब मुसलमान परिवार के बच्चे स्कूल आते हैं तो उनको रोजमर्रा में सीखने में क्या क्या समस्याएं आती हैं या क्या होता है कक्षा में. और दूसरा ये अध्ययन हो सकता है कि शिक्षा एक तो हमें ज्ञान देती है, ठीक है, पर एक शिक्षा का और बहुत सारे लक्ष्य होते हैं, जिनमें से कुछ होते हैं कि वो हमारी एक अस्मिता का विकास करती है, हमें आत्मनिर्भर बनाती है, हमारा अपने में एक तरह का विश्वास जगाती है कि मैं दुनिया में कुछ भी अपने दम पे कर सकती हूँ या कर सकता हूँ, क्योंकि मुझ में एक मेरिट है, मुझ में एक गुण कुछ आ गए हैं और मैं किसी लायक हो गई हूँ. तो शिक्षा का ये वाला जो लक्ष्य है या ये वाली जो भूमिका है लड़कियों की जिंदगी में, कि वो अपने आप में ये आत्मबल, मनोबल महसूस करें कि हम दुनिया में कुछ भी कर सकते हैं, हमें करना चाहिए, हमारी अपनी पहचान होना, हमारा अपनी व्यक्तिगत पहचान होना हमारे लिए महत्वपूर्ण है और हम ऐसे करने लायक हैं. क्या ऐसा हो रहा है? और इसको समझने के लिए जो पहले से सिद्धांत में मुझे पता था कि धर्म और लिंग भेद और गरीबी, ये तीनों चीजें इसको असर डालती हैं. तो इसीलिए मैंने ये चुनाव किया कि मैं इनको समझूं कि दिल्ली जैसे शहर में जहां हमें लगता है कि स्कूल के मौके बराबर हैं, शिक्षा के मौके हैं, ट्यूशन है, टीवी है, फलाना कई सारी स्कीम्स चल रही हैं, इनमें इनके बावजूद क्या ऐसा ही हो रहा है? क्या स्कूल जाके और स्कूल के बिल्कुल अंत में पहुंच के 11वीं और 12वीं में क्या अब ये मुसलमान लड़कियां अपने आप में इतना मनोबल महसूस कर रही हैं? आर दे एस्पायरिंग? क्या अपने उनके इंडिविजुअल एम्बिशंस हैं, या वो उस ढांचे में सोच रही हैं जो धर्म और परंपरा और गरीबी से आ रहा है, जिसमें पहले से तय जिंदगी के लक्ष्य हैं, उन्हीं को उन्होंने स्वीकार लिया है। इसीलिए हम इस तरह के अध्ययन करते हैं। तो शिक्षा यानी स्कूल भी एक संस्था है, सामाजिक संस्था है। परिवार, धर्म, गरीबी, ये भी संस्थाएं हैं, कुछ आर्थिक हैं, कुछ सामाजिक हैं। इनके आपस में टकराव को हम कुछ लोगों की जिंदगी में समझते हैं, ताकि हमें समझ में आ जाए कि वर्तमान में शिक्षा की क्या सीमाएं हैं या शिक्षा की क्या उपलब्धियां हैं। इसीलिए हम ऐसे अध्ययन करते हैं, और मैंने किया।
Thank you. That was a very, very
थैंक यू मैम।
good answer, very good response, and I think you cleared a lot of Narayan's doubts and difficulties and gave us
जी
the
जी जी
learning
मैम,
opportunity
श्योर।
also. है ना Narayan? आप संतुष्ट हैं?
यस मैम,
Yeah, good, good.
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल
Okay.
मैम।
Or
पूर्णतः।
any other?
थैंक यू सो
Yes,
मच।
MPhil students, the floor is open to you first. उसके बाद मैं अपने colleagues को बुलाऊंगी. Anybody else from the MPhil group? आप लतिका मैम से कुछ पूछना चाहेंगे? Please don't hesitate. आप सामने आइए, unmute yourself and please ask. Come on, there's so many of you here. There's Raj Lakshmi, Shweta, Sadhna, Vidushi, भावना, मोनिका, पंकज, इतने सारे लोग हैं. Anybody wishing to ask anything from लतिका मैम? कुछ आप पूछना चाहेंगे तो आप अवश्य पूछिए, जो भी आप पूछना चाहते हैं, big or small, and it can be in the context of your own research as well. ठीक है? Yeah. Vidushi, would you like to ask something? Yes, please come forward. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah.
Hello, Latika ma'am. I thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I think we all are going to take away certain basic set of skills today, especially the reference part and like paying attention to the contours of the study. But I really want to know from you, like, how do you read a particular paper? Like, apart from keeping the objectives in your mind that you want to base your study on, because as you mentioned at the beginning only कि आपने अपना PhD 3.5 years में कर लिया, so I assume there must have been a lot of efficiency and effectiveness in that process. So I really want to know how you read a paper and then you extract the most essential elements from it. How do you make that kind of judgment? If you could share with us. Thank you.
Okay. First thing I'll tell you is that my supervisor had told me right at the beginning that PhD is not the end of your life. It's the beginning of your academic life. So see it only as a rigorous training in doing research and in producing knowledge. So do not think that this is it and after that I'm going to die. No, you are just being born. So be very realistic and don't be over ambitious in doing a PhD. So make choices, simple choices, and adhere to them. Now, the second thing is, how do I read and how do I retain? I must tell you that I do it even now. And that habit I had developed when I was doing masters. It's almost like a reading skill. I was taught actually by two people, Dr. Shobha Sinha and Professor Krishna Kumar. They had taught me that when you read a theoretical paper or even a book, in the beginning, at least with 5 or 6 readings, you have to summarize the paper. And how do you summarize? You summarize the paper by summarizing every paragraph. So you read a paragraph and you write one sentence about that paragraph, and you do it almost like a missionary activity, that you will only write one simple sentence on that paragraph. You will not write compound sentences that you use conjunctions but, therefore, as, and as well as. One simple sentence per paragraph. And at the end of the article, you will have about, say, 50-60 paragraphs, 50-60 sentences, which when you put together, you will leave out at least 30 of them. And those 20 sentences will be your reading of that paper. That exercise, I think I did with almost 10 to 12 very difficult readings in my master's when I was doing my MA. And as Professor Kumar had said, that will then make you mentally capable of retaining the points. And I have always tried, at least in my tutorial and in my master's classes, made my students also do this exercise. So once you have started doing, and once you have done about 4 or 5 like this, so I literally had those college light registers lying somewhere even now, where I would write the article or the book's name, paragraph after paragraph, 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences, and then I would convert those 50 sentences into a paragraph of about 10 or 12 sentences. That's a real intellectual skill, and this is the only route to develop it. Once you have done it in writing, trust me, you will retain that capacity, the skill, and you would be able to do it with all the books and articles. Your mind will get trained to figure out what is the most important point in this. And I have really seen that students struggle to identify the main points. That what is it that the scholar has said, what is it that the scholar has raised as a point, and what are the supplementary and complementary sub-points or even examples. Mostly I have seen that scholars or students get stuck with the examples, and they just don't, the main point gets missed completely. Yes, some role should, some role of the teacher is also there, because you will keep doing the exercise, and if you don't have anybody who's little more experienced to point out, but the main point is here, and these are all sub points, and sometimes some people may go here and there, but it's largely reading intellectual skill of reading and retaining, and writing helps.
Latika, may I also add something to that? Because I've also
Yes.
tried this, and I have many of my scholars here. So I also follow that. But I also ask them to list out 2 or 3 questions that have come to their mind, unanswered questions, after reading that particular paper or book or chapter or whatever they've read. So, that takes their curiosity further and makes them probe or look for something new where they will find answers to their unanswered questions. And, Ravneet and Tulika, 2 people took very long, and Vishakha, 3 of them have very serious conceptual frameworks. And, they were all going round and round in circles, reading similar books on childhood or morality or whatever they were working on. But this really helps. So when the unanswered questions, and Vidushi, this is also for you and for all the other students, when you also raise unanswered questions at the end of your reading, after what, Latika has prescribed, getting the salient points across, you get a new direction in which you want to move. Or you understand that you don't want to move in that direction, whatever it be. It works both ways. So thank you, Vidushi, for raising that. Thank you, Latika, for responding to that. Okay, open to all others as well. Anybody else would like to say something or add something?
I want to say something to Vidushi.
Please.
Because I had done BLEd, so I had studied feminist schools of thought in my undergrad program only. Then I also read in masters. And when I was doing my PhD, I had by then become fed up of this, woman talk. And I had made this choice very clearly that I don't want to anchor my study on girls in feminist discourse. And my supervisor was constantly telling me that, your work will be scrutinized by those who are feminists because it is a study of girls. But I had made this choice because I had read feminist writings, a liberal school, radical school, Marxist school, and mentally I didn't feel clear enough. I felt कि मैं इससे निकलूंगी तो इसमें फंस जाऊंगी, इसमें निकलूंगी तो इसमें फंस जाऊंगी. मार्क्सिस्ट, रेडिकल और लिबरल, फेमिनिस्ट सबके साथ, अभी 2-3 छूट गए, सबके साथ न्याय करना तो मेरे से होगा ही नहीं, तो मैं इसको पूरे को हटा देती हूँ. तो मैंने फेमिनिस्ट थ्योरीज को बिल्कुल भी हवाला नहीं दिया. क्यों? क्योंकि मैंने उनको समझ लिया था और मैंने अच्छे से अपने नोट्स रिटेन किए थे. और जैसे कि मैम ने कहा कि कुछ मुद्दे थे जो मुझे सुलझने से ज़्यादा लगता था उलझ गया, तो मैंने आई मेड दैट चॉइस. इवन दो मैंने बड़ी मतलब जवानी में ही पढ़ लिया था उनको, पढ़ के बार पढ़ के मैं काफ़ी थोड़ा उस वुमेन डिस्कोर्स से परेशान हो चुकी थी. सो आई मेड दैट चॉइस एंड दैट्स व्हाट रीडिंग इनिशियली विद अ फोकस हेल्प्स यू.
Anybody else? Please come freely forward. Anybody else from the MPhil group? Rajlakshmi, Shweta, Sadhna, Pankaj, Bhavna. Anybody? Monica? कोई कुछ पूछना चाहेगा? Okay, so other colleagues who are here. So Rishabh is here, Vishakha is here, Rashi, Manisha, Tulika, Ravneet. Would you like to say something? Would you like to share something? Would you like to also talk to Latika, get into a dialogue about something? Please feel free and come forward. And you can talk about your own struggles if you wish in your own conceptual frameworks, in arriving at your conceptual framework. So if anybody would like to come forward and do that. Vishakha, would you like to come forward? Rishabh, come. Rishabh, welcome Rishabh. Yeah.
हेलो मैम, लतिका मैम का प्रेजेंटेशन सुनते हुए बहुत ही अच्छा लग रहा था. एक तो जो मैम की प्रेजेंटेशन की यूनिकनेस मैं कहूँगा कि कैसे एक थियोरेटिकली इवॉल्व होता है स्कॉलर, उसको मैम ने बहुत अच्छे से बताया. क्योंकि कई बार हम रिसर्च को एक फील्ड वर्क बेस्ड प्रोसेस मानते हैं कि हमको एक सेट ऑफ डेटा लेना है और उसका इंटरप्रिटेशन करना है, और हम ये भूल जाते हैं कि जो कुछ भी आप फील्ड के साथ करना चाह रहे हैं उसके लिए आपका थियोरेटिकल, जो आप थियोरेटिकली जैसे आप खुद को कैसे इम्बेड करते हैं एक पर्टिकुलर थियोरेटिकल फ्रेम ऑफ वर्क में और कैसे खुद इवॉल्व होते हैं, वो बहुत जरूरी है. तो मैं मैम की प्रेजेंटेशन से इस बात को अप्रिशिएट करता हूँ, और आगे भी जहाँ कहीं भी एज ए टीचर, एज ए रिसर्चर हम लोग रहें, ये जरूर मैं अंडरलाइन करना चाहूँगा कि एक स्कॉलर थियोरेटिकली जब इवॉल्व होता है तो ही वो फील्ड वर्क के साथ एक अच्छा एंगेजमेंट बनाता है और वो निकल के आता है. खासकर एक ऐसी थियरी जहां पर रिलीजन का डिबेट है. इंडिया के अगर कॉन्टेक्स्ट में देखा जाए तो हम रिलीजन को, इस्लाम को लेकर, और इस्लाम में भी महिलाओं को लेकर जिस तरीके से सोचते हैं, जैसा नमिता मैम से मैंने एक बार डिस्कस भी किया था कि कई बार जैसे लतिका मैम अल्मा इकबाल का रेफरेंस ले रही थी, तो अल्मा इकबाल को हम एज ए फुल, जैसे एज ए एकेडमिशियन बहुत हम नहीं देखते, लेकिन एज अ थिंकर, एज अ साहित्यकार जो उनकी भूमिकाएं हैं, जैसे जिसे पब्लिक इंटेलेक्चुअल के रूप में अल्मा इकबाल को देखते हैं, उसको भी मैम ने पढ़ा. कैसे एक रिलीजियस टेक्स्ट ने उनको उसमें इवॉल्व होने के लिए मदद की, कैसे छोटे छोटे आर्टिकल्स जो समय समय पर इन्होंने पढ़े. तो इस चीज़ को मैं अप्रिशिएट करता हूँ और मैं मैम को धन्यवाद देना चाहूँगा कि उन्होंने एक सुंदर तरीके से हम लोगों को समझाया कि कैसे थियोरेटिकली इवॉल्व हुआ जाए एक पर्टिकुलर डिसिप्लिन में, मतलब डिसिप्लिनिंग द डिसिप्लिन कैसे हुआ, वो उसको मैम ने हाईलाइट किया. थैंक यू मैम.
Correct, Rishabh. Vishakha, I would like to call you to share something. You've also worked with religion. You also had to read a lot about religion and morality. Please come forward. Vishakha has just submitted her thesis. It's gone for evaluation. Vishakha, please share. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So thank you so much, Latika ma'am. It was quite interesting. I've read your work, so it was even more interesting to hear it from you. I think my journey in terms of arriving at a conceptual framework was quite different from your journey. It wasn't as smooth in the sense that it was a constant struggle, because every time I would read something on morality, there was something, I would realize that there is so much more to it. And the complexity became even more because I took 5 different religions, and that made my task even more challenging. So understanding, the cosmology, as you indicated, of all 5 religions became quite a task for me. So how, I don't have a question, but I think, did you ever feel that because you've only taken one religion, you have, not have not been able to incorporate what other religion, probably girls from other religion would experience? Or would a comparative study between a Hindu and a Muslim would have kind of added something more to your research?
Actually, I did compare, and there is a section where I made very, specific and focused comparison between the experiences of Hindu and Muslim girls. For instance, mobility is a marker of independence. फिजिकल मोबिलिटी, हम कहाँ जा सकते हैं, क्या अपने को करने लायक मानते हैं. और स्कूल सोशियोलॉजी में स्पेशली थर्ड वर्ल्ड के लिए ये मैं इस तरह की चीज़ें गीता किंगडम वगैरह के आर्टिकल्स में, नीता कुमार के राइटिंग्स में पढ़ चुकी थी कि स्कूल कितना भी घटिया हो. अमृता सेन ने भी कहा है कि स्कूल कितना भी घटिया हो, वो एक काम तो ज़रूर करता है कि वो लड़कियों को घर से रोज बाहर निकालता है और रोज जाने का एक तरह का आत्मविश्वास देता है, बिकॉज ट्रेडिशनली दे डोंट इवन मूव आउट. तो मोबिलिटी को लेके मेरे दिमाग में एक फैक्टर डेवलप हो चुका था, दैट मोबिलिटी इज एन एस्पेक्ट नीड्स टू बी स्टडीड. एंड since I had already chosen, I had already made this choice that there will be some comparison with Hindu girls of the same age and same locality, Old Delhi. So I had also read and unlearned and then learned about Hinduism. And I had in the very beginning understood that this is not a simple difference, which is the difference of religious institution. That in Hinduism, going to a temple is a major ritual, and one doesn't feel complete in it oneself if one doesn't go at all. Whereas in Islam, going to a religious institution is, first of all, not such a big ritual. Second, it's only for men in our country, and therefore there is one a marker or one possibility of physical movement which is available in one religion but is not available in another religion. Does that create any difference? So it's not that I did not understand the idea of construction of identity in other religion. I did understand in Hinduism, and I also drew out these markers of differences to explore how girls had negotiated those. So the girls were moving out, and Hindu girls would move out on their own, whereas Muslim girls didn't. And I did then, elaborately studied the mobility patterns coming from religion. That was one example.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Vishakha, anything else you'd like to say?
No, ma'am. It was a
Okay.
presentation.
Ravneet, I'd like to call you if you're here, because
ma'am.
remember how you found that your training in child development was so inadequate, because now you were looking at childhood from a much bigger canvas. So
Yes,
how
ma'am.
you were impelled to move towards readings in the sociology of childhood. Would you like to talk about that briefly? Yeah.
Absolutely, ma'am.
Yeah.
First, I would like to say, ma'am, give me 1 second. Bishop, can you just do this? Ma'am, there is too much of noise, background noise, because 2 of the devices are working here. Ma'am, in the first place, I'd like to say that Latika's work and my journey are actually quite similar, because in both the cases, the theoretical, the conceptual framework, we worked with that first, we struggled with that first, and then to the field. My study was iterative in nature, and this field did guide me. But before going to the field, I actually read intensively, and there were themes that had already started emerging in conversation with you and also through the readings that we were jointly reading. So that was very important. And the other thing was that when I started reading, I spoke about it earlier also, child development gave me a lens of looking at children in a very different way. But when I started reading, after say about say 7 or 8 years of struggling with the same question, which I took up in my PhD. So when I started reading, my training I felt was not adequate. And the lenses that other disciplines were providing me were much more important to understand what now I was, uh, trying to find answers to. So, for instance, if I very simply explain what I'm saying is that child development understood children from an interdisciplinary lens, from nutrition point of view, from development point of view, from how child can be understood through a context, the child's mind, but it was not understanding how sociology may look at a child. So that was something that was missing. Then when I read about childhood studies, it gave me a totally different perspective of understanding children, where children are not subjects that we are studying, they are actually subjects, they are the center of the study actually. So they give a very different point of view where child's perspective that we had been talking about, but we have not really explored. A family may be named, say, a Sharma family, or it may be named, say, Mihir's family. So this, the two names that we are giving to a family, they themselves make the center of the family something else. So that was the time when childhood studies actually helped me give a new lens and new way of understanding and looking at things. And it was certainly one of the very new lenses that I was exploring. Just as Latika said that she had read gender so much that now she wanted a new lens to understand things that she was looking at. Similarly, for me, it was almost like introducing myself to a totally new world, and also around me, I had not seen any study done through this lens. People had looked at how children live in families, people had looked at how children talk about themselves. So, this data was similar for, say, a number of people, it could be similar, but the lens through which I was analyzing it was totally different for me and for them. And in education, I did not take a myopic view of what child's education is all about. It is not about what the child does in the classroom. It was also about what the child does at home. So
That's
when we are looking it from the education department, it has to be understanding of both the things together. So I think these are some of the learnings that I took from there. And if
Thank
you may
you.
allow, ma'am, I want to ask a question also.
Yeah, please ask. Please ask.
Ma'am, the question that I want to ask is that since religion was a very important overriding factor that Latika had studied, at any point, did she feel any kind of, say, hostility in terms of words, ideas, feelings from anyone? Was it there? Thank you.
Actually, Ravneet, no, I didn't feel that. And on the contrary, what happened was that because of the field work, I was moving a lot in parts of Old Delhi. And so I wouldn't be left with any time to go anywhere else in shop. So I started buying suits and some cotton dupattas in that part. And when I started going to the school and the families, they started telling me, आप लगते तो मुसलमान हो पर नाम आपका हिंदू है. So I really didn't feel a sense of hostility.
That's
Also remember that my master's was also on religious identity, and I had become pretty, well versed with all of Old Delhi and Nizamuddin. Masters dissertation. I could just take walks in parts of Old Delhi and even in Nizamuddin, on certain occasions, and more time you can't.
Latika, you may put off your video, then your bandwidth will be better. Put off your video. Yeah. Yeah, put off your video. Yeah.
Any only difficult my work. I was very prone to and what I had to visit that I was feeling and 2-3 days.
So Latika, we are not able to get the voice very clearly because I think your bandwidth is low. Yeah. But we've got the sense of what Ravneet's question. I mean, you've responded to that.
Yes.
Tulika, are you here? Tulika, are you here?
Yes, ma'am.
Tulika, I would like you to come in and tell us about, your eureka with your conceptual framework and what your process was very briefly. Yeah.
Ma'am, I would, so the conceptual framework journey, as I had shared in my presentation earlier, it was a roller coaster ride. I mean, and I looked at it in an iterative way. मैंने पहले भी जब first presentation अपना किया था, तो मैंने उसमें भी बात की थी कि मेरा field work और conceptual framework लगातार एक साथ चलता रहा. बट एक दो चीज़ें जो अभी मुझे दिमाग में आ रही हैं, जो मैं conceptual framework कैसे डेवलप करते हैं, उस पर थोड़ा सा अगर बात करूँगी तो रिव्यू के टाइम पे जो रीडिंग्स के लिए, जैसे लतिका ने भी बताया कि हम लोग समरीज कैसे बनाते हैं, तो कुछ चीज़ें वहाँ से मैंने, जो मुझे अब लग रहा है कि ये लर्निंग हुई, विच इज़ दैट एक तो ये अंडरस्टैंडिंग कि हम शायद एक रीडिंग को दोबारा कभी पूरी उठा के वर्ड बाय वर्ड नहीं पढ़ेंगे. तो जब पहली बार पढ़ रहे हैं तभी उसको बहुत डिटेल में पढ़ लेना चाहिए और उसी टाइम पे उसकी समरी और एनोटेशन बनाना बहुत ज़रूरी है, बिकॉज दोबारा शायद उठा के हम फिर वो सिर्फ उस टाइम पे ढूंढते हैं कि वो कौन सी चीज़ें जो हमें अपने काम में डालनी है. सो द सेकेंड थिंग विच स्टेम्स आउट ऑफ दिस इज, एंड आई थिंक दिस आई मीन मैम आपको शायद याद होगा, मेरा एक वो फाइल होता था और मैं पेजेस पे समरीज बनाती थी और फिर मैंने रिसर्चेस जो मैंने पढ़ी उस टाइम पे, जैसे लतिका ने भी बोला JSTOR एक्सेस तो नहीं होता था, तो हम लाइब्रेरी में बैठ के पढ़ते थे. और वो प्रोसेस ये था कि हर एक जर्नल का इशू उठाइए, उसके इंडेक्स को पढ़िए और उसमें देखिए कि आपके काम से जुड़ी हुई कौन सी स्टडी है, जिन भी 3-4 वेरिएबल्स को आप डोमिनेंट मान रहे हैं, और फिर उसकी आप समरीज बनाइए. और हो सकता है कि कभी आप पूरी समरी बनाएं और बाद में लिखें कि ये मेरे काम की नहीं है. सो ये भी लिखना कि क्यों काम का नहीं है. जैसे लतिका ने बोला कि फेमिनिज्म को वो नहीं लेना चाह रही थी, मगर फेमिनिज्म पढ़ने के बाद उनको पता है कि वो इसको नहीं लेना चाहती हैं. बिना पढ़े किसी चीज को मना कर देना आपके लिए एक लिमिटेशन हो सकता है. सो एक ये एस्पेक्ट. अनदर सजेशन आई हैव इज दैट अगर आपके जो भी एरिया पे आप काम कर रहे हैं, आइडेंटिटी पे, जेंडर पे, स्कूल चिल्ड्रन पे, क्लासरूम प्रोसेसेस पे, जिस भी चीज़ पे हम काम करते हैं, अगर आइडेंटिफाई कर पाएं एक रिव्यू पेपर जो कि उस एरिया में लिखा है. So one of the questions that we struggle with in the conceptual framework is, have we read enough? कब पता चलेगा कि अब हमने 20 स्टडीज पढ़ ली, अब हमने 50 स्टडीज पढ़ ली, अब इतना काफ़ी है या अभी और पढ़ने की ज़रूरत है. सो अगर ये कोई रीसेंट रिव्यू पेपर होता है तो आपको उसमें से डोमिनेंट पेपर्स जो कि पिछले 10 साल में, पिछले 20 साल में जो उस एरिया में आए हैं, उनके सारे रेफरेंसेस मिलते हैं. एंड फ्रॉम देयर यू कैन स्नोबॉल इनटू अदर रीडिंग्स दैट यू हैव टू टेक अप. सो द आइडिया दैट आपका एक रिव्यू पेपर में अगर 20 आपने की ऑथर्स आइडेंटिफाई किए हैं, तो उन 20 ऑथर्स ने और किसको रेफर किया है. सो आपके लिए वो रिव्यू पेपर एक स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट हो सकता है. So this is how I felt. I mean, when I look back, I feel this was a process for developing the conceptual framework for me. But to be honest, I still sometimes feel I haven't read enough. So I still go back and read more in the same area.
Great. Thank you. I'm talking with my mic off. I want to close this now, and I want to close it by thanking you once again, Latika, for such a scintillating session, intellectually stimulating and scintillating. And you were able to generate so many questions and so many moments of sharing. Scholars could also relate with what you said, and they were trying to apply it to their own work. And our community of colleagues has also shared with you what they went through, drawing from what you also shared. Really, really thankful to you. I've also learned a lot. I mean, my idea of doing these sessions is to learn from, my younger community of colleagues. And so it was a very good learning experience for all of us. I thank you one and all. And we are now having our next session on Friday. Just reminding all of you, you must have all got the link. And I think Rishabh and Ravneet are both here. So we will have both of them one doing textbook analysis, the other doing film analysis, with a theoretical framework.
Yes, ma'am.
So we look forward to that. All the scholars, please note it in your diaries. I think Tulika ma'am has already sent you the link. So Friday, day after tomorrow, same time, same place, we'll all meet. So thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy. and we close the meeting now. Thank you. Vanessa.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.